Hi everyone, Mike again with MEG Motors. Today we're going to be working on this Bolens BL100 line trimmer. This is the fourth piece in a group of 8 pieces that I bought from the same guy. The BL100, the Bolens BL100 is kind of a low-end trimmer. It doesn't even have a clutch in it, so if the engine's running, the trimmer head's turning all the time. It never stops. But you know, for $10, I got 8 pieces for $80, so I got about $10 in each piece. For $10, it's worth taking a look at to see if we can fix it. I've looked it over a little bit. The trigger handle is actually broken. There's a little stub left. You can still hit it, but the trigger's broken. I'll look around and see if I can find one of those. And the fuel lines are hard like they always are. And so I'm sure we're going to end up doing some fuel system work on this one. But we're going to do our standard start on spray test. We know we need compression and we need ignition, we need spark, and the spark has to occur at the right time for this engine to run. And so we can test those two components, the spark and the compression, by using a shot of carburetor cleaner in the carburetor and then pulling it through and seeing if we can get it to start. If it'll start on spray, then we know compression and ignition are in place and working like they should. So I've already loosened the air cleaner cover, so we're going to just pop that off. And then we're going to go with the choke open and the throttle wide open, and we're going to shoot just a little bit of carburetor cleaner in there. And then we're going to see if it'll start. So here we go. So that's what we hope to hear when we work on these. So that little bit of start tells us that we have ignition and we have compression, and so we need to look at the fuel system and see what we're going to have to do to fix that. So I'm going to reset the camera. We're going to pull the carburetor off of this one, and we're going to go through it and see what we see inside, and then see if we can get it to run. Okay, so to get the carburetor off of this one, we're going to take these 2 screws out. That'll take off the plate that has our choke on it, and that should loosen up our carburetor. I can feel just trying to get it to come loose that the fuel lines are pretty hard and stiff on this one. That one's off. We'll get our throttle cable out of there. Alright, so there's our carburetor. Actually looks really clean. So yeah, let's reset a little bit and we'll open this one up and see what's going on inside. Alright, so here's our carburetor. This one is a Walbro. I hope you can see that on the camera. A Walbro. And this is even simpler than most of the ones we work on because the primer bulb is remote. Most of the time the primer bulb is on the carburetor, on the fuel pump side. But on this one the primer is remote, and so we don't even have a primer on this one. And so these carburetors have 2 main components. There's a fuel pump on this side that'll pump fuel out of the tank. It'll come up through this line, and then there's a metering chamber over here that will meter fuel and store fuel for the engine to use. And so we're going to open the fuel pump side first. You don't normally see a lot of trouble in here, but we got to check it every time anyway, just to make sure. And so things look relatively clean in there. So here's our fuel pump diaphragm, and what we're looking for on the fuel pump diaphragm is to make sure that this membrane here, which is the pump diaphragm, this diaphragm is pulsed back and forth with pulses from the crankcase, and it works in conjunction with these 2 flaps right here that work as check valves or one-way valves. And so when this is all put together, this valve, for instance, this flap will sit on top of this hole, and this one will sit on top of this hole, I believe. Yeah. And so as the membrane is pulsed back and forth, it will pull fuel up from the tank and out this hole, but it won't allow fuel to go back to the tank, because we want the fuel to continue to flow from the tank. And then it'll come from there, it'll go through this hole into the fuel pump, and then it'll come up out of the fuel pump here, and the check valve will let it come out this way. But when the pump is in the intake stroke, pulling fuel out of the tank, we don't want it to suck fuel back out this way. So this valve will seal off to stop us from pulling fuel back out of the carburetor. And once the fuel comes up here, it'll go through this passage to get over to, it should go through that passage. Yeah, it'll go through this passage to get to this screen. And this screen actually sits on top of a passage that goes all the way through the carburetor to get fuel over to the metering chamber side. So we got a little bit of dirt in there, not too much though. So we'll clean that up before we put this back together. But other than that, yeah, everything looks good. The membrane looks good. So I don't think we have any problems there that we have to deal with. So yeah, so let's open up the metering chamber side and see what's going on over there. This is where we typically see the troubles. So under here we have a metering diaphragm, which is a pretty critical piece of this carburetor. I'm going to pull this one off. And yeah, I don't know if you can hear that, but this diaphragm is moved by the intake action of the engine. And so as the engine, normally this chamber is full of fuel, and as the engine pulls fuel out of this chamber, it'll pull this diaphragm down into the chamber until this button contacts this lever and unseats the needle. And when it unseats that needle, the fuel from the fuel pump side, which is under pressure, will flow across the passage and come out through the needle and refill the chamber. And as it fills the chamber, the diaphragm will lift and the lever will lift and the needle will seat, and it'll stop fuel from flowing in to the chamber. And so if this diaphragm can't move easily, it'll either get stuck up or down, and the engine will either flood or starve for fuel. And so this is the common problem that we see on most of these carburetors. And so we'll put a new diaphragm in there and see what that does for this engine. So we're going to take the needle out too, just to see if it needs to be cleaned. And you want to hold your finger over this when you do this, because there's a spring in there, and it's a pretty small spring, and if it goes flying, I suspect you'll have a hard time finding it. So yeah, so this is the passage I was talking about that goes through to the other side, to this screen over here. So this is where fuel comes from the fuel pump to fill this chamber. And here's our needle, and it doesn't look too bad. Got a little bit of dirt on the rubber end there, so we're going to clean that up a little bit, and yeah, then we'll put this back together. So I'm going to pull a new diaphragm out of my parts inventory, and then we'll put this back together. All right, so here we are. I've pulled a new diaphragm from my parts. Doesn't look exactly the same. There's a minor difference right here, but this diaphragm will work just fine in this instance. So we're ready to start putting this back together. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to clean this needle. And so I just like to spray a little carburetor cleaner in the corner of a rag, and then I'll put the rubber end in there and spin it back and forth a few times. And I'll keep doing that until I don't get any more dirt. You can see what came out for that one, hopefully. Once I'm done, I'll dry the needle off as quickly as possible, because sometimes the carburetor cleaner will interact with the rubber on the needle and make it swell up. But if you're quick about it, it's usually okay. So that's good. We're going to put the needle back in where it belongs. We're gonna put the spring in place. And I showed on a previous video, sometimes this spring can be a little difficult to control, and so you can put a little dab of grease in that hole and it'll help hold the spring in place. And it doesn't hurt anything. As soon as the chamber fills with fuel, the grease will dissolve and it won't hurt anything. But so I'm gonna set this needle. So when we look at the needle, we see it's got a dimple in the lever, and the spring has to fit around that dimple. And so I'm gonna lower the lever onto the spring first and then work it back under the needle. And then once it's in place, we can look from the side, and hopefully you can see right in there that the spring is in the right place. And then we'll put our retainer spring or screw back in place. Let's see, I think that's this one right here. And then we're going to check one more thing. So the height of the lever is an important adjustment on these carburetors. It has to be the right height in order for it to work properly with the diaphragm. If the lever is too high or too low, then when the diaphragm moves, it'll open and close the valve at the wrong time. And so what we need to do is we look at this carburetor, and hopefully, I don't know if you can see that, but there's a model number right here on the side of the carburetor, and this one starts with WT. And so we look at our gauge. This gauge is from Walbro, and we find the same lettering on the gauge, and in this case there's a WT right there. And so that means that we'll use this part of the gauge to check our needle. And so we'll set our gauge right here, and the gauge should just barely touch the lever. And so this one looks really, really good. Most of the time, if you're not replacing the lever and the needle, if you buy a complete rebuild kit, it'll come with a new lever and a new needle. And if you buy that kit and you replace all those parts, you really need to check that lever to make sure that it comes out set right. But if you don't replace all those parts, you don't replace the lever and the needle like we didn't here, it's rare that they're out of adjustment. Still need to check it, but most of the time they don't need any adjustment. So yeah, so we're gonna put our gasket on, and then we'll put our new diaphragm on. And the diaphragms, you can buy the diaphragms on Amazon or eBay. I buy them in bulk, and you can typically get them for about, I don't know, $1 or less a piece, depending on how many you buy. And so if you're going to be doing a bunch of these, it's worth buying them in bulk. If you're only doing one, you can buy them individually for just a couple dollars. All right, and then we're going to put our fuel pump side back on. Everything looks good over there. Alright, that pretty much takes care of our carburetor overhaul. I noticed on this one, I've seen this before, the carburetor only has one adjustment needle. Typically, a carburetor will have two needles, one for low speed, one for high speed. This one's even marked with an L and an H for low speed and high speed, but it doesn't have a needle for the high speed. So there'll be no way to adjust high speed once we get this back together. I'm not sure why they did that, but they did. And so hopefully it'll run okay. If not, we have limited options to adjust the high speed, at least as far as I know. Somebody else knows of a way to adjust the high speed mixture when there's no needle. Please enter it in the comments and let me know. All right, so we're gonna reset a little bit, and we'll put some fuel lines on that and replace the primer bulb and see if we can make it run. All right, so here's our fuel lines on this one. They're not the worst I've seen. This one is actually still pretty flexible, but the other two are pretty hard. So we're going to go ahead and put new fuel lines, and we're going to replace this primer bulb. So with an external primer bulb, there's 3 lines. There's one from the pickup that goes all the way straight to the carburetor. And then there's one that comes out of the carburetor, goes to the primer bulb, and one out of the primer bulb that goes back to the tank. And on this Bolens, normally when we're doing fuel lines, they go in from the top of the tank, which would seem to be a better idea because they're less likely to leak. But on this Bolens, they go into the bottom of the tank, and so gotta have to be careful that they don't leak. So this one's the return line. We're gonna try to just pull that out of the tank. There we go, that came right out. And so there's that line. And we're gonna try on our new fuel line, we're just gonna cut a taper on it, and we're gonna lubricate it, and we're gonna see if we can manually push it up into the hole and not have to use our pull tool. But if it won't pull, if we can't push it in there, we got a tool that'll pull that in there. So we're just gonna cut a taper on it, like that. And I got a little lubricant, it's a rubber lubricant. And we're gonna see if we can push this line up into the tank. And it feels like it went in okay. I'm gonna look inside the tank and see if it's inside. I'm gonna have to put a light on it and see what I can see. Oh yeah. All right, so looking inside the tank, I can see that that line has gone far enough into the tank that it's going to work just fine. And then we have this line, and so the way this is made, I'm not sure how that's going to work. This is actually the end of the fuel pickup filter. The weighted fuel pickup is normally in a tank that sticks out of the bottom of the tank, but it feels like it's in the tank so loose that it's going to leak fuel. So we're going to see if we can get the fuel line off of this one without breaking it. And then we may have to examine how that's supposed to work. I worked on BL100s before. I don't remember seeing them put together quite like this. There we go. Well, that broke off. Well, that fuel line, there we go. That fuel line did not want to come on. And so yeah, so now we're looking at, yeah, there's no way that's not going to leak. Let's see if I can get that to come out. Oh, I see. So it looks like the way this is supposed to work, when I look at this fuel pickup, there's actually a fuel line coming all the way up to here. So I think we're supposed to put some fuel line on it and then pull it back down through the hole in the bottom of the tank. So give me just a minute, I'm going to clean this up a little bit, and then we're going to come back and see if we can put a fuel line on this. All right, well, in the process of trying to get the fuel lines off of that piece, I ended up breaking it. So this is supposed to be one piece right here, and I've broken it. So we're gonna have to try putting in a different one. So I pulled this one. This one came out of my collection of spare fuel pickups. And so we're gonna try to put this one in its place. And so what we're going to do is we're going to pull a new fuel line in here. We're going to pull it all the way up out of the tank. We're going to put this fuel pickup on it, and then we're going to pull it back and see if we can get it to come out of the tank. Because it's supposed to, because when we put this on, it's going to flare the end of the hose a little bit. The hose actually fits easily in this hole right here. And so I think we can just beat it right in there. Like that. All right, so here we go. We have our fuel line all the way out. We're gonna put this little rubber gasket on there. Oh, not on there. Oh, you know what? All right, I can put that on. Okay, so we're gonna put our fuel pickup on right here. And we're gonna put a little lube on the fuel line right there. Then we're gonna see if we can pull this line back and get that fuel pickup to extend out of the tank just a little ways by pulling on the fuel line. There we go, it's coming actually. I'm gonna see if I can reach something inside the tank and help push that through. So that seems to be as far as it wants to go. And so hopefully you can see that the end of that new fuel pickup we put on there is extending out of the tank, and it actually fits really tight in there, so I'm confident it's not going to leak, which is what we need. And so yeah, I think we're going to go with that. I think we're okay there. All right, and so this fuel line is going to go through a hole in the air filter housing and over to the carburetor. So we're going to reset just a little bit and put a new fuel primer bulb on it and remount the carburetor, and then we'll cut some of these lines to length and see if we can get them hooked up. Give me a minute to pull a primer bulb and reset a little bit, and we'll see if we can get that work done. Okay, so I pulled a new primer out of my parts bin. This one's actually not too bad. It still seems to be working okay. It's still soft, but it's discolored a little bit, which is a sign that it's getting old, and I don't want this to split if I sell this to somebody. So here's a new one. We're going to put a new one in there. The primers have two fittings on them. There's a long one and a short one. And the short one is the one that pulls fuel in, and the long one is the one that exhausts it out. So when you pump the primer, it's going to pull it in the short tube and push it out the long tube. And so these just have two snap clips, and they snap right into the holder. Nothing magic about that. And so this is our return line. This is the one we just pushed into the tank manually. And so this needs to go on the exhaust fitting, which would be the long fitting. So we're going to cut this line off right here, and we're going to put that on the long fitting of our primer. There we go. And then this is our, now we need three lines. So we need one from the primer to the tank, one from the primer to the carburetor, and one from the pickup to the carburetor. And so it doesn't matter really what order we put these in on, but we're going to stick this one, we're going to use this one to be the other one that goes to the primer. And so this one's going to go to this fitting up here on the top of the carburetor. Right there. And then we're going to pull it back a little bit. and connect it to the short fitting on the primer. And so when we pump the primer, it's going to suck on this line, which is going to pull our diaphragm, our metering diaphragm down. It's going to press on the lever, open the needle, and pull fuel in through the fuel pump through this fitting over here. And so we need to cut this line now to length. I'm going to try to put this gasket on that was on the old line. I'm not sure that it really makes that much of a difference, but we'll go ahead and put it on there. All right, and then we're going to come through the other fitting on our air filter housing. And then this line is going to go down to this fitting. Made it a little too long. Yeah, so when we pump our primer, we're going to pull the vacuum here. It's going to go through the metering chamber down to the fuel pump and pull fuel all the way from the fuel tank into the carburetor. And then as the engine is running, the fuel pump will continue to pull fuel through this line. So yeah, so that's a new metering diaphragm, a new primer, and new fuel lines. We're ready to put some fuel in this. We'll put some fuel in it, we'll test the primer, and as long as it moves fuel correctly, we'll see if we can get this one to start and run. All right, so let's test our primer. I'm going to press the bulb a few times, and what we hope to see is fuel coming out of this line. This is our pickup line. It'll go through the carburetor and come back out this line, fill up the bulb, and then push it back to the tank. And so let's see what happens. Watch this line first. There's fuel coming down. That's a good sign. I just saw fuel come here, and you can see fuel in the primer bulb, and there it is going back to the tank. So that's all a good sign. Our plumbing is hooked up correctly, and our primer is working, our diaphragm is working. So we're ready to try to start this one, see if we can make it run. I'm going to reset the camera, and I'm going to get an adjustment tool, a couple of adjustment tools, one for the idle speed and one for the single mixture screw that we have. And then we'll see if we can make this one run. Okay, so with new fuel lines, new primer, and a new metering diaphragm, we're ready to see if we can make this one start. So we're going to go a full choke to start, prime the bulb, and let's see what happens. I heard it kick just a little bit. I'm going to go back to half choke right now. actually sounds pretty good. Starts good. Starts easy now. Smoking a little bit. I don't know how long it's been since this ran. It starts easy. It seems to be running good. I played with that one mixture screw a little bit. It seemed to have impacted both low and high speed, so I'm not 100% sure how that one works, but it did adjust and it seems to be running good. The top end sounds pretty good now. So yeah, I think we're going to call this one fixed. I'm going to look around and see if I can find a new trigger for it. If I can get one reasonably priced, I'll put a good trigger on it, but this one is usable, just not as long as it should be. So yeah, I think we're going to call that fixed. So I hope you liked the video. If you did, please like and subscribe, and check my playlist. There's other videos out there about small engine repair. And yeah, I hope this encourages you to get out and work on your own. As you can see, this one was not all that difficult to fix, other than this one special tool, which it needed to adjust the carburetor. And you can buy these tools on Amazon. Other than this one special tool, it was all just standard hand tools and nothing really terribly complicated. So yeah, go out there, give it a try. It may save you from having to buy a new one. But anyway, yeah, thanks for watching, and stay tuned. We'll see you on the next video.